The sky over Silver Creek was the kind that didn't bother to shine or storm, it just hovered gray and tired, like it had forgotten how to feel. On that Monday morning in late September, Eli Bennett stepped off the yellow school bus and stared at the 3-story brick building that would now be his high school. It looked old, not charming old, but run-down old. Paint peeling at the window frames, the American flag hanging limp in the still air. The school was called Silver Creek High, but it felt like the kind of place that never really belonged to anyone. Eli didn't speak to anyone as he walked through the crowded hallways. He kept his hoodie up, his backpack slung over one shoulder, his eyes low. He had learned, over the years, that drawing attention was dangerous. Being invisible was better. Safer. This was his 6th school in 4 years. He'd been passed around from one foster home to another like a cardboard box, handled roughly, labeled fragile, but no one ever read the warning. His current placement was with Donna Whitmore, a 70-year-old widow who ran a second-hand furniture store and let him stay in the spare bedroom upstairs. She didn't ask questions, didn't try to get close. She gave him food, a bed, and silence. Eli figured it was the best deal he was going to get. First period was English. The classroom was tucked into the far end of the 2nd floor. Eli walked in last and took the desk in the back corner, closest to the window. The teacher hadn't arrived yet. The room was mostly quiet, filled with the buzz of teenagers scrolling through their phones or whispering to each other. Then the door opened, and in walked a man who didn't look like any teacher Eli had ever seen. He was tall, maybe in his 40s, African-American, with salt and pepper hair pulled back into a low ponytail. He wore a dark gray sweater over a white shirt, no tie, jeans instead of slacks. His eyes scanned the room, not with the casual boredom most teachers had, but with something sharp, deliberate. He wasn't just seeing the class. He was reading it. "Good morning," he said simply. His voice was calm, smooth, like it belonged on an old jazz record. "I'm Monsieur Whittaker. I'll be your English teacher this year." A few students muttered half-hearted hellos. One kid in the front row asked, "Are you a sub?" Mr. Whittaker smiled slightly. "Nope. I'm permanent. Or as permanent as anything gets these days." He set down a leather-bound notebook on his desk and looked around. "I'm not going to spend today reading the syllabus. You'll get that tomorrow. Today, I just want to know one thing about each of you." Groans followed. "I know," he said, raising his hands in mock surrender. "You're all sick of introductions. But I'm not asking for your GPA or your favorite color. I want one sentence. One truth. Doesn't have to be deep. Just honest. Something no one knows about you." A murmur of nervous laughter rippled through the class. "You don't have to explain it. Just say it. If you'd rather write it, that's fine too. Leave it on my desk before you go. You can sign your name or not. Up to you." Then he added, "I'll start." He paused, and in the brief silence that followed, Eli felt the room shift. Everyone leaned in a little. "My daughter loved thunderstorms," Mr. Whittaker said. "She used to pretend they were dragons fighting in the sky." That was all. He nodded, then gestured toward the front row. "Your turn." The students went around, some reluctantly, others with too much enthusiasm. Most were shallow confessions: "I'm afraid of fish, I've never been kissed, I sing in the shower." A few were raw. One girl whispered, "My dad hasn't called me in 6 years." A boy with curly hair wrote his sentence down, folded the paper 4 times, and handed it to Mr. Whittaker without a word. When it came to Eli, he simply said, "Pass." Mr. Whittaker looked at him, then nodded once. "All right." The class ended without fanfare. As the students filtered out, Eli hung back. Something about the quiet tone of the room had stuck with him. He hesitated, then pulled out a blank page from his notebook. In his small, careful handwriting, he wrote, "I haven't spoken to my mother since the day she left me at the ER when I was 6. He didn't sign it. He folded it and placed it on Mr. Whittaker's desk on his way out. Later that night, Eli lay on his mattress at Donna's house, staring at the ceiling. The room smelled faintly of lemon cleaner and old books. He thought about the way Mr. Whittaker had said that sentence. "My daughter loved thunderstorms." He thought about the weight behind the words. "Ce qui est peint." And for the first time in months, Eli picked up his pen and opened a blank page. He didn't know what he was writing. Not exactly. But the words came like slow rain, quiet, persistent, uninvited. Today, someone saw me without asking where I'd been.
It scared me.
And I liked it. The next morning, when Eli got to class, Mr. Whitaker was already there, sipping coffee and reading through a stack of papers. He didn't say anything when Eli walked in, just gave a small nod. When Eli took his seat, he noticed something different. Inside the groove of his desk was a small leather-bound notebook. Not new-worn, with a cracked spine and creased corners. On the inside cover, in neat handwriting, were the words,
For when the noise j'ai tout loud. Vous.
Eli ran his fingers along the page. The first one was blank. Waiting. He didn't know why the gesture made his chest tighten. Maybe because it wasn't loud or dramatic. It was quiet. And sincere. And sometimes, that was scarier than anything else. Because it meant someone saw him. And maybe, just maybe, he was no longer invisible. For the next few days, Eli carried the leather-bound notebook with him everywhere, tucked in his backpack during school, under his pillow at night. He hadn't written in it again since that first entry, but he found himself flipping through the blank pages in quiet moments, as if waiting for them to whisper something back. Mr. Whitaker didn't mention it. He didn't single Eli out or treat him differently. But every time Eli walked into room 214, the atmosphere felt a little less heavy. There was something about the way Mr. Whitaker spoke, calm, deliberate, as if each word had passed through a filter of reflection before being released. He wasn't trying to impress. He wasn't trying to please. He was simply present. One Thursday morning, after a particularly chaotic second-period math class, Eli slipped into English early. The room was still empty. Mr. Whitaker was at his desk, writing in his own notebook, the same kind of leather-bound journal he had given Eli, only older, darker, with edges that looked almost scorched. Eli paused at the door. You're early, Mr. Whitaker said without looking up. Just needed quiet, Eli muttered, moving to his seat. Mr. Whitaker nodded. He didn't ask why. After a moment, he said, You ever feel like words are safer on paper than in your mouth? Eli looked up. Yeah, he said, surprising even himself with the quickness of the answer. Mr. Whitaker closed his notebook and leaned back in his chair. Me too. Eli didn't respond, but he didn't look away either. That day's lesson was about narrative voice. Mr. Whitaker didn't assign a textbook chapter. Instead, he played a recording of a woman reading from a memoir, her voice shaky but strong, recounting the moment she walked away from an abusive home. After it ended, he turned to the class. Why did this story matter? Hands went up. A girl near the window said, because it was raw. Another chimed in, she didn't try to make it pretty. It was just honest. Mr. Whitaker nodded. Exactly. Truth doesn't have to be polished. It just has to be yours. Then he handed out a single-page prompt.
Assignement, write about a moment when you chose silence.
Or when silence was chosen for you. Due Monday, he said. Typed or handwritten. You don't have to read it aloud. You don't even have to put your name on it. But I expect you to write. Over the weekend, Eli sat at his small desk in the corner of Donna's upstairs room. Rain tapped against the window, a soft rhythm that matched the pulse in his ears. He stared at the prompt for hours, fingers hovering over the notebook. Then he began. I was 6 the first time I learned that silence could scream louder than voices. I remember fluorescent lights and nurses with tight smiles. I remember holding my mother's purse because she said she'd be right back.
She never came back.
No one explained. A woman in scrubs knelt down, asked me my name.
He whispered it.
That whisper was the last sound I made for weeks. He didn't stop until 3 pages were full. When he finished, his hands ached, but his chest felt lighter. Not empty, but aired out. On Monday, he handed the folded pages to Mr. Whitaker and returned to his seat. Not a word passed between them. That afternoon, as Eli was packing his things, Mr. Whitaker approached quietly and held out a small piece of paper. Folded twice. Eli took it, slipped it into his pocket. He waited until he got home to read it. That was brave. You don't have to roar to be loud. I hear you. Vous. The words settled into his spine like heat. A few days later, Mr. Whitaker asked the class to stay a few extra minutes after school. He had an announcement. I've started something. Voluntary.
Nos grades, nos pressures.
Every Wednesday after school, room 214 becomes a writing room.
Open door. Come in, sit, ou write.
No one talks unless they want to. You don't have to share. You don't have to stay the whole time. But it's a space. For you. There were groans, rolled eyes. But a few students looked intrigued. Eli didn't react. That Wednesday, after the final bell rang and the halls had mostly cleared, Eli found himself standing in front of room 214 again. The lights were dimmed. Mr. Whittaker sat at his desk, a lamp casting warm gold over his notebook. Eli hesitated. "You're here," Mr. Whittaker said, not looking up. "Just to see." "That's allowed." Eli sat in his usual seat. The room was quiet. A few other students filtered in, 2 girls from his class, a boy from the grade above. No one spoke. Pens scratched on paper. The only sound was the clock ticking and the occasional sigh. Eli didn't write at first. He just watched. But something in that silence wasn't empty. It was full. Like breathing room. He opened his notebook. "Today I sat in a room where silence didn't mean absence. It meant presence." That was new. When the hour ended, no one rushed out. They drifted, slow and steady, like leaving something sacred behind. Eli walked past Mr. Whittaker's desk. Their eyes met briefly. No words. That night, he wrote 3 pages. The next few weeks moved differently after that first Wednesday session. Not faster, not slower, just fuller. Eli began to anticipate room 214 not as a class, not even as a responsibility, but as something resembling a refuge. A sanctuary made not of silence, but of space. Each Wednesday, a few more students joined the room.
Nos formales invitations.
Just word of mouth, whispers in the hallways, someone saying, "It's not therapy but it helps."
Monsieur Whittaker never called it a club.
He never assigned tasks. There were no introductions, no attendance sheets.
Only notebooks and time.
And something began to grow in the stillness, an unspoken agreement that this room for this hour was off limits to noise that didn't matter. Eli noticed faces now. Names, even. Maya, who always wrote with earbuds in but never played music. Jonah, the athlete who came straight from basketball practice and smelled faintly of gym mats and Gatorade. Rachel, who always brought a thermos of tea and never looked up from her pages. No one asked questions.
No one interrupted.
But slowly, across those weeks, they began to leave pieces of themselves behind. Lines from poems, pages slipped anonymously into a small wooden box Mr. Whittaker kept at the front of the room, labeled "Only if you want."
One afternoon, Monsieur Whittaker read a line alou at the end of the session.
"I feel most real when no one is watching." He didn't say who wrote it. He didn't need to. Eli started writing more, not just in the Wednesdays, but at home on the bus, in the quiet moments between the noise. His notebook filled faster than he expected. He found himself exploring corners of memory he'd ignored for years, his mother's chipped nail polish, the hum of the ER waiting room television, the look on a nurse's face when no one came to claim him. One Thursday, during lunch, Eli was surprised to find a folded piece of paper tucked into his locker vent.
No name.
No decoration. Just one sentence written in red ink. Your story in the journal was real. His heart skipped. The school had published its quarterly literary journal that morning. Eli's submission, a short prose piece titled "The Purse," had been included anonymously. He hadn't even told Mr. Whittaker he'd submitted it. He wasn't sure he could handle it being seen. But it was there, printed on page 9. She handed me her purse and said she'd be right back. I was 6. The purse was blue leather, with a broken zipper.
He held it for hours. No one ever came back for it.
Reading it in print had sent a tremor through Eli. He hadn't realized how exposed it would make him feel. But now, holding the anonymous note in his hand, he felt something shift. A warmth. A flicker of being understood. Later that day, in English class, Mr. Whittaker paused mid-lecture to hold up the journal. I read something in here that made me stop breathing, he said. He didn't say which piece. Eli lowered his gaze. That night, he found himself scribbling furiously in his notebook. Is it strange that I feel more seen in words I don't sign than in anything I say aloud? At the next Wednesday session, The room felt denser. More students than ever had come. They brought snacks, extra pens, someone even lit a small electric candle on the windowsill. Mr. Whittaker walked in with a cardboard box labeled Story Wall. He set it down at the front and explained. Here's the idea. If you write something you want to share, even just a line, stick it on the wall. No names.
No pressure.
Just truth. By the end of the hour, 3 sticky notes had been posted.
I crai in the shower sonoanir.
I failed biology and haven't told my dad. I still talk to my brother, even though he's been gone 3 years.
The wall grew fast.
By the second week, there were dozens of notes. They curled at the edges, some written in perfect script, others in scrawled, shaky lines. Together, they made a collage of vulnerability that Eli couldn't stop staring at. One note made him stop cold. I was left at an ER too. He looked around the room, but no one gave anything away. And that somehow made it even more powerful. Whoever it was, they knew. And now they knew he knew too. The next day, during lunch, Eli sat under the stairs in the back of the school library, a spot he'd started claiming as his own. He opened his notebook and wrote, "We build whole universes out of broken things, hoping someone else will find a home in the wreckage." He didn't know where the line came from, but he tore the page out and folded it twice. At the end of the day, he dropped it into the Only If You Want box. The following Wednesday, Mr. Whittaker read it aloud. Something electric passed through the room.
No applause. Juste deep, collectif silence.
Eli caught Maya glancing his way. She gave the tiniest nod. He didn't know if she knew he'd written it, but in that moment, it didn't matter. After the session, Mr. Whittaker pulled Eli aside. "I'm putting together a compilation," he said. "Pieces from the story wall, the box, maybe some full entries if people are willing.
Nothing public.
Just for us.
Something real.
Something we built." Eli nodded. Mr. Whittaker added, "I'd like you to write the introduction." Eli's throat tightened. "Why me?" "Because you were the first to be honest. And because your voice is one others are starting to follow, even if they don't know your name." Eli didn't answer right away. But later that night, he sat on his bed, the notebook open on his lap, and wrote the first line. "This isn't a book of stories. It's a book of echoes, people speaking into a void, hoping someone somewhere might answer back." He didn't stop writing for 2 hours. It happened on a Monday. Eli walked into school like any other day, hoodie up, earbuds in, backpack hanging off one shoulder. He passed the usual crowd at the front entrance, the girls who talked too loud, the boys who elbowed each other like everything was a joke, and kept his eyes low. But today felt different. Tighter. Quieter. It wasn't until second period that he knew why. He found it taped to his locker. A photocopy of the purse, the story he had submitted anonymously to the school literary journal. Except now, his name had been scrawled in red marker across the top. Eli Bennett is a freak. He stared at the paper, not moving, while students streamed by behind him. Laughter echoed. Someone took a photo. Someone else muttered, "I knew it was him." Eli peeled the paper down slowly, crumpled it into his hand, and walked away. In math class, 2 desks behind him giggled under their breath. One voice, a boy's, said just loud enough for Eli to hear, "Wonder if his mom left 'cause he wouldn't shut up about his feelings." A girl added, "Bet he cried into the purse too." Eli's pencil snapped. He stood up without asking and walked straight out of the classroom. The teacher shouted something behind him, but he didn't stop. He headed for the locker room. It was empty during class. He sat on the bench between the rows of metal lockers and tried to breathe. In. Out. In. Out. But the air wouldn't come right. He didn't cry. He didn't yell. He just sat there, fists clenched, the crumpled paper still digging into his palm. 15 minutes passed before the door opened. It was Aiden Cole, Jr., varsity football, always grinning like he owned the hallways. "You stormed out like a drama queen," Aiden said, stepping inside. "What, can't handle a little attention?" Eli didn't move.
Aiden walked closer, holding another copy of the story.
"Didn't know this was you. Kinda makes sense though. You always were a little off." He smirked, waving the paper in Eli's face. Eli stood up. He didn't plan what happened next. The movement wasn't thought, it was reflex. A blur. He swung.
It Eden Square in the jaw.
There was a yell, a crash, a locker slamming open, and both of them were on the floor, fists flying. Eli didn't feel anything. Not the punches, not the floor under him, not the blood when it came. It was only when Coach Davis pulled them apart, both of them heaving and shouting, that Eli realized what he'd done. He was suspended for 5 days. Donna didn't speak the entire car ride home. She didn't need to. Her silence was heavy enough to crush concrete. When they got home, she handed him an ice pack, pointed to the guest room, and said, "Think about what you're doing with your life."
Ellie sat on the bed, eyes burning, fist throbbing. And the notebook sat on the desk.
He didn't open it that night. The next day, Mr. Whittaker called. Donna passed the phone through the door with a clipped, "It's your teacher." Eli didn't want to answer. But something in him, the part that remembered the first folded note, the quiet voice that said "I hear you," made him pick it up. Mr. Whittaker's voice was soft. Controlled. "I heard what happened," he said.
Are you okay?
Eli didn't know what to say. Then finally, quietly, "They put my name on it. Everyone knows." "I know. I didn't ask for this," Eli whispered. "I just wrote it. I didn't want it to be exposed." Mr. Whittaker didn't respond right away. Then he said, "Sometimes when we tell the truth, people get scared. They mock it. Try to shrink it. But that doesn't mean the truth was wrong." Eli stared at the wall. "I got suspended." "I know," Mr. Whittaker said. "And I got a warning. The administration thinks I'm too close to my students. That I'm encouraging emotional behavior." Eli felt a cold twist in his gut. "This is my fault." "No," Mr. Whittaker said firmly. "This is about a system that doesn't know what to do with kids who feel deeply. Who speak honestly." Eli felt tears prick his eyes, but he blinked them back. "I'm sorry," he said. "You don't have to be. But you do have to decide, are you going to stop writing because they mocked you? Or are you going to keep speaking, even when it's hard?" Eli didn't answer. Not then. That night, he lay awake long after midnight.
The notebook still sat untouched.
In the early hours of morning, unable to sleep, Eli opened the drawer and took it out. He stared at the blank page, the edges stained from where his bleeding hand had pressed it the day before. And then slowly he began to write. It wasn't the punch that hurt. It was the silence afterward. The way no one looked me in the eye. The way they laughed around me, not at me, as if I was furniture. As if I didn't have blood still drying on my shirt. I hit him because I was tired of being opened without permission. He kept going. For an hour. 2. By sunrise, the notebook had 10 new pages. When Donna came in with breakfast, she said nothing. Just placed the plate on the desk, saw the notebook open, and nodded slightly. By the end of the suspension, Eli had written more than he had in months. He returned to school with his head high, even though the whispers followed him down the hall. He returned to room 214. The story wall had grown, more pages, more confessions. Someone had left a sticky note that said, "Thank you for writing the purse." Mr. Whittaker met Eli's gaze as he entered. They didn't speak. But when Eli took his seat, he noticed something on his desk.
A new notebook. Deep blue.
On the first page, a quote was handwritten in bold black ink.
Glass break.
Light gets in. Keep writing anyway. The night Eli left Silver Creek, the sky was a dark, bruised purple, hanging low and heavy. He didn't tell Donna. He didn't write a note. He just packed the basics into a backpack, 2 shirts, a jacket, a toothbrush, his notebooks, and took the 9:20 p.m. bus out of town. He hadn't planned to run. It wasn't a decision, exactly. It was more like a quiet unraveling that had started the day his story got plastered to the lockers, and accelerated with every sideways glance, every muttered name, every teacher who suddenly looked at him like he was fragile glass instead of a student. He didn't even know why he chose Portland. Maybe because it was the closest big city. Maybe because it felt anonymous. Or maybe because he needed to disappear somewhere that didn't know his name. By midnight, he was walking along Burnside Street, keeping his head down, hands deep in his pockets. The city buzzed around him, neon lights flickering in bar windows, the hum of buses, the echo of footsteps that didn't belong to him. He ended up sleeping in Laurelhurst Park, curled up on a bench beneath a patchy blanket he found abandoned on another bench. The wind cut through his hoodie, biting at his ribs. He didn't sleep much. But it didn't matter. By morning, the hunger started to settle in. Eli wandered downtown, his stomach aching, head foggy. He passed cafes and food carts, the smells of cinnamon and coffee taunting him. At a trash bin near a fast food restaurant, he found half a sandwich in its wrapper, slightly soggy but edible. He ate it slowly, his hands trembling. He stayed near the public library most days, sneaking into reading rooms for warmth, pretending to browse books while charging his phone. No one asked questions if you looked like you belonged. On the third day, he found the youth shelter. It was a red brick building near the edge of Old Town, modest and plain. A chalkboard outside read, Writing Workshop, Thursdays at 5 p.m., no experience needed. He walked past it the first time, then circled back. The word writing had hooked something inside him. That Thursday, just after 5, Eli pushed open the door. Inside was a narrow room with folding chairs, a whiteboard covered in doodles, and a table stacked with notebooks and pens. About 10 people were there, some teens, some early 20s, all with guarded eyes. At the front stood a girl, maybe 25, with short curly hair, a denim jacket, and a clipboard. She smiled when Eli entered. "First time?" she asked. He nodded. "I'm Rosie."
You can grab a seat anywhere.
"You don't have to share unless you want to." He sat in the back. She handed him a notebook. The cover was green, textured, blank. It reminded him of the one Mr. Whitaker gave him. "I just came to write," he mumbled. Rosie nodded. "That's what we do." She gave a prompt, "Write about the first time you felt invisible." The room fell silent. Pens moved. Some scribbled furiously, others paused long between sentences.
Ellie sat frozen for a moment.
Then he opened the notebook and wrote. "It was the night I realized my voice had no audience."
That he could scream without making a sound.
It wasn't that they didn't care. It was that they never looked long enough to know I was there. He didn't share that night. But Rosie approached him afterward. "Your handwriting," she said softly, "looks like someone who writes a lot."
Ellie shrugged.
"You ever published anything?"
Et hésita-t-elle.
"Kind of." "Well," she said, "you've got something. If you ever want to share, I'd love to read it." She handed him a card, Urban Echo, Youth Voices Collective.
Below it, rosie@urbanecho.org.
That night, back in the shelter bunk room, Eli stared at the card for a long time. Then he took out his worn notebook and wrote a letter he never intended to send.
Dear Monsieur Whitaker.
I left. I didn't mean to. I just couldn't stay. Everyone knew. Everyone stared. And the way the teachers looked at me changed, like I was something to tiptoe around. I know I made things harder. For you. I'm sorry. But I'm still writing.
You said to write when the noise get too loud.
So I am. The streets are louder than any hallway. But when I write, it quiets down a little. I hope you're still reading.
Ellie.
He ripped the page from his notebook and folded it carefully, like a real letter, then tucked it into the back cover. The next few days were a haze of movement. Shelters, libraries, wandering. But he returned to the Thursday workshop. Rosie was there again, and this time, she remembered his name. The prompt that week was, "Write a letter you were too scared to send." Eli looked down at his notebook. He raised his hand. "I have one," he said. The room turned to him, some surprised, some curious. He pulled out the folded page and read it aloud. His voice shook at first, but steadied by the second paragraph. When he finished, the room was silent. Rosie said, "Thank you." Someone else whispered, "That hit." He sat back, heart pounding, but lighter somehow. After the session, Rosie approached him again. "Would you let me send that? To your teacher?" Eli hesitated. "I don't know where he is." "Do you know the school?" "Silver Creek High," he said. "In Oregon." Rosie nodded.
That is enough.
"I'll try." He handed her the letter. The next morning she gave him a new notebook, red this time, with a note on the inside. "Keep writing."
Somewhere, sommeones listening.
That night, for the first time since he'd arrived in Portland, Eli slept through until morning. 2 days after Rosie mailed the letter, Mr. Whittaker received it in a plain envelope with no return address. He recognized the handwriting immediately, thin, tightly spaced, like every word had been measured before it landed. He read the letter once at his desk during lunch, once more in his car after school, and again that night under the yellow glow of his reading lamp. Each time, it sank deeper.
Eli was alive.
He was writing. Mr. Whittaker placed the letter inside his old leather notebook and closed it with a careful breath. He didn't call the school or social services. He didn't tell the principal or file a report. He did the only thing he felt mattered. He got in his car the next morning and drove to Portland. He found Rosie through the contact on the letter. She was cautious at first, not revealing Eli's location until she confirmed Mr. Whittaker's identity. Once she was certain, she softened. "He's safe," she said. "He's been writing like crazy. He reads his pieces out loud now. It's not the same boy he described in that letter." "Can I see him?" Mr. Whittaker asked. Rosie paused, then nodded. "He's at the workshop tonight."
You should come.
"But let him decide what happens next." That evening, Mr. Whittaker stepped into the same narrow room Eli had entered days earlier. The space buzzed quietly with energy, pens scratching, quiet laughter, the rustle of notebook pages turning. At the back, head down, hoodie on, was Eli. He didn't notice at first. He was deep in writing. Mr. Whittaker stood still for a moment, unsure whether to speak or wait. Then Rosie gently placed a hand on Eli's shoulder and nodded toward the door. Eli looked up. He froze. Their eyes met across the room. The world went very still.
Eli stood slowly.
He walked toward Mr. Whittaker, notebook in hand, unsure of what to say.
Monsieur Whittaker spoke first.
"I got your letter." Eli opened his mouth, then closed it again. His voice didn't come easily. "I wasn't going to send it," he finally said. "I'm glad you did." They stood for a long moment in silence, not awkward, just full. Mr. Whittaker gestured toward a bench by the window. "You want to sit?" They sat side by side. The buzz of the room faded into background static. "I thought I broke everything," Eli said. "The program, your job, our classroom." "You didn't," Mr. Whittaker said. "You cracked something open, but that's not the same as breaking it. Some things need to crack to let the light in. I didn't want anyone to know it was me. That I wrote the purse. But it was you," Mr. Whittaker said gently. "And it was brilliant." Eli looked away.
"I can't go back."
"You don't have to. But I came because I thought, maybe you don't want to keep running either." They sat in silence again. "I liked the way people looked at me here," Eli said after a while. "Not like I was broken.
Just unfinished."
Mr. Whittaker smiled. "That's what all of us are." Eli looked down at his notebook. "I've been writing every day. I'd love to read it."
Maybe someday.
"That's enough for now." Later that evening, Mr. Whittaker spoke with Rosie. "He's got a voice," she said. "It's rough, sometimes raw. But it's true. Kids listen when he reads. It's like they've been waiting for someone to say what they were scared to think." Mr. Whittaker nodded. "That sounds like the Eli I know." They made a plan.
Eli wouldn't return to Silver Creek, not to live.
But he'd go back for one day. A visit. A goodbye. A beginning. The next week, Mr. Whittaker drove him back. The drive was quiet, the roads familiar but distant. Eli stared out the window most of the way, clutching his red notebook like a lifeline. Donna was waiting on the porch when they pulled in. She didn't run to him. She didn't cry. But she nodded once and opened the door. "I kept your room the same," she said.
Eli stepped inside.
It smelled like dust and lemon cleaner. Like nothing had moved. That night, he slept in his old bed and wrote a new letter in the dim light of the desk lamp. Coming back feels like standing in a house that's still on fire, but somehow it doesn't burn you anymore. The next day, he and Mr. Whittaker returned to room 214. The classroom was quiet. A few students looked up as they entered.
Whisper spread.
Mr. Whittaker stood at the front.
"This is Eli.
Some of you know his writing. Some of you know his story. He has something to share." Eli didn't hesitate. He stepped forward, opened his notebook, and read a new piece titled Where the Words Went. It was about running, hiding, writing, breaking, and choosing to stay. It was about the moment in Portland when someone listened without asking for anything in return. And about the boy who thought he'd lost his voice, only to realize it had just been buried under years of silence. When he finished, no one clapped. Not because they didn't want to, but because clapping felt too small. They just sat with it. After class, Jonah came up and said, "You wrote the one about the ER, right?" Eli nodded. "It made me cry. In a good way." "Thanks," Eli said, and meant it. That evening, before leaving town again, Eli walked to the story wall. It was still there. Still covered in notes, new ones, old ones, some faded, some barely legible. He added one more. "I thought I needed to disappear. Turns out, I just needed someone to see me and not flinch." Then he turned and walked away, notebook under one arm, Portland waiting. Back in Portland, something shifted in Eli. The return to Silver Creek hadn't closed anything, it had opened more than he expected. But instead of fear, what settled in him now was clarity. He wasn't done running because he had nowhere else to go. He was done because he finally had somewhere to stay. Rosie noticed the change immediately. At the next Thursday workshop, Eli arrived early. He helped set up chairs, straightened the stack of blank notebooks, filled the coffee carafe. When the others came in, they nodded at him, not as the quiet outsider, but as something closer to a fixture.
A piece of the place.
After the session, Rosie approached him with an idea. "I've been thinking," she said, "about expanding this. Not just a drop-in space, but an actual writing program.
For kids like you.
A safe space, built around voice. You'd help lead it."
Eli blinked.
"Lead it?" Rosie grinned. "You're already doing it. Half the kids here started coming after hearing you read. They talk about your writing like it's gospel." He didn't know what to say. "You don't need to be a professional to teach voice," Rosie said. "You just have to have one." So they did it. With help from a small grant Rosie secured through Urban Echo, they turned the Thursday sessions into something bigger. Flyers went up around shelters and youth programs. They named it the Writing Room. No more than 15 participants at a time. Each week centered on a theme: loss, home, fear, hope, forgiveness. Eli co-led every session with Rosie. He didn't lecture. He didn't try to inspire. He just showed up, opened his notebook, and read what he'd written. That was enough. And they came. One by one, stories filled the space. Janelle, 16, who wrote about the way her mother's boyfriend always knocked before entering, but never waited. Rico, 17, who crafted poems out of rap lyrics and grief, using rhythm to name the brother he hadn't spoken of since the funeral. Tyra, 12, who didn't say a word for 3 weeks, then dropped a folded story in the submission box titled "My Mouth Isn't Broken. I Just Don't Lend It Out." But the one who struck Eli hardest was Zion. Zion was small for his age, maybe 13, with buzzed hair and a backpack twice the size of his body. He didn't look anyone in the eye. He flinched when people got too close. Rosie told Eli quietly, "He's been in the system since he was 4. 9 homes. One of them locked him in a bathroom for punishment. He doesn't talk much." Zion came every week. He didn't write at first, just listened. He sat in the back, near the exit, his chair angled toward the door like he needed a fast escape. But Eli recognized the signs. He saw himself in the tension of Zion's shoulders, in the way he watched people more than he watched the page. One Thursday, the prompt was "Write a place where you were not afraid." Zion didn't move for 20 minutes. Then, near the end of the hour, he pulled out a pencil stub and began to write. At the end of the session, he walked straight to Eli and handed over the page without a word. Eli read it that night. "There was a cupboard at my 3rd foster house. It was under the sink, empty, smelled like old lemons. No one checked there. I would sit with my knees to my chest, my ears covered, and imagine I was in a spaceship. The bad sounds couldn't get in. I wasn't afraid there."
He was nowhere.
Eli stared at the page until the words blurred. The next week, he asked Zion if he wanted to read aloud. Zion shook his head. But the week after, he nodded. His voice trembled. But he read the cupboard story. When he finished, no one said anything. Not out of judgment, but reverence. Then a girl in the front said softly, "I had a closet like that. It smelled like bleach." Zion looked up for the first time.
Something in the room cracked open.
From that week forward, Zion wrote every day. He started showing Eli his work between sessions. Eventually, he started typing it. "You should submit to Youth Words," Eli said one evening. "They publish teenage writers." Zion looked skeptical. "Why would they care what I write?" Eli smiled. "Because they don't know yet that they need it." Together, they picked out 3 pieces. 1 poem, 1 flash fiction, 1 short essay. Zion hit submit himself. Weeks passed.
Then one day, a letter came to the shelter.
Zion ran to find Eli, waving the envelope. They said yes. They're publishing all 3. They stood in the hallway laughing, really laughing, and Eli felt something open in his chest, something bigger than pride. Hope. Later that night, Eli sat in his room, rereading Zion's first cupboard piece. He opened his own notebook and wrote, "I used to believe the best thing I could do was survive. Now I wonder if the best thing I can do is help someone else believe they were meant for more than surviving." The next session, Rosie announced they were expanding to a second night. A weekend group for younger writers. Zion volunteered to help lead it. "We'll call it Echo Kids," he said. Everyone clapped. Eli sat back in his chair, watching the room.
Watching them write, whisper, pass stories.
Mr. Whitaker had once told him that words didn't save people. People saved people. Words were just how we knew who needed saving. Now, Eli believed it. He wasn't healed. Not completely. He still had nights where the memories pulled hard. Still had panic when he saw a hospital sign or the color of that ER purse in a thrift store window. But he wasn't alone in it. And that made all the difference. It started with a phone call Eli almost didn't answer. He was at the community center, cleaning up after a weekend session of Echo Kids. Zion had just left, still buzzing from helping a 10-year-old write their first story about a dog that could talk to ghosts. The sun was setting, painting the Portland skyline in streaks of gold and lavender, and Eli's phone buzzed quietly on the table.
Unknown number.
He hesitated, thumb hovering above the decline button. Then something made him press accept. "Is this Eli Bennett?" the voice asked. Female. Soft. Nervous. "Yeah," he said cautiously. There was a pause on the line. Then, "My name is April. I'm calling from the Department of Human Services in Lane County. I have some news. It's about your biological mother." Eli stiffened. He hadn't heard those words, biological mother, spoken out loud in years. "She reached out," April continued. "Her name is Karen Daniels now. She's been sober for 3 years.
Mariée, with a doctor."
She asked if we could contact you.
Eli sat down slowly.
"She wants to meet?" he asked. "She said she wants to apologize. To talk. But only if you're ready."
No pressure.
"We can coordinate a meeting in a neutral location if you're open to it." Eli didn't respond for a long time. His thoughts scattered, old memories uncoiling like smoke, his mother's chipped red nails, the way her voice sounded like gravel in the morning, the last image he had of her walking away through the hospital doors. "I need to think about it," he said. "Of course," April replied.
Take all the time you need.
That night, Eli didn't write. He didn't sleep much either. The next morning, he told Rosie. She didn't offer advice. She just listened. When he finished, she said, "Meeting her won't undo anything. But it might help close a door you've been stuck staring at." 3 days later, he said yes. The meeting was arranged in a small room at the DHS building in Eugene. There were chairs, a water cooler, and a table between them. No cameras.
No recording.
Just 2 people and 10 years of silence. Karen walked in quietly. She looked older than Eli remembered, more tired around the eyes, her hair darker, streaked with gray at the roots. She wore a cardigan that looked too big for her frame and held her purse with both hands like it might float away. "Hi," she said. Eli nodded. "Hi." They sat. The air buzzed with things unsaid. "I don't expect anything," she began.
Not forgiveness.
Not answers. I needed to see you. To say I'm sorry. For what I did. For leaving. For all of it. Eli didn't speak. She looked down. I was sick back then. Not an excuse, but it's the truth. I didn't know how to be a mother. I didn't know how to stay clean. I didn't even know how to stay. He looked at her hands. They were trembling slightly. I thought you'd hate me, she said. And I deserved that. Eli finally found his voice. I did. For a long time. She nodded slowly. But then I stopped, he added. Not because you earned it. But because carrying that hate made me tired. And it didn't bring you back. It didn't fix anything.
So he let it go.
Karen's eyes filled. You're more grown than I ever was at your age. I had to be, he said. They sat in quiet for a long time. She told him about her recovery, the meetings, the moments she almost gave up. She showed him a photo of his half-sister, age 5, with a toothy grin and pigtails. She knows she has a brother, Karen said. But I didn't tell her why you're not around. Not yet. Eli looked at the picture. The girl looked happy. Whole.
A different life.
I'm glad she has you, he said. You can have me too.
If you want.
He shook his head gently. I think I already found the people I need.
Karen blinked.
Then nodded. Okay. They didn't hug. They didn't make promises. But when Eli stood to leave, she whispered, I'm proud of you. He didn't know how to receive that. But he carried the words with him anyway. Back in Portland, he went straight to the writing room. It was empty, mid-afternoon, before the session started. He sat in the circle, opened his notebook, and wrote. I thought closure would feel like a slamming door. But it's quieter than that. It's just someone saying I'm sorry, and you realizing you don't need them to say anything else. That evening, during workshop, he read the piece aloud. No one spoke after. They just let it hang. Afterward, Zion came up to him. You good? He asked. Eli nodded. Yeah, I think so. Zion grinned. You write about her? A little.
Gonna write more.
Probably. You think I should write about my mom? Eli looked at him, really looked.
Zion was allé now.
He laughed more.
Trusted more.
But the old ghosts still clung around his edges. When you're ready, Eli said. And only then. That night, Zion sent Eli a text with a screenshot of a new document on his computer. The title read, Things I Never Said to Her. Eli replied with a heart. Then opened his own notebook and started a new entry. Family is a word people like to define for you. But sometimes, family is the kid who hands you their broken poem. Sometimes, it's the woman who listens without asking for details. Sometimes, it's the teacher who says nothing but stays in the room. And sometimes, it's not the one who gave you life, but the ones who helped you write it down. It was late autumn when Mr. Whitaker stopped coming to the writing room. At first, Eli thought it was just a scheduling conflict. The man was older, always juggling his teaching job with community work and mentoring. He had taken a step back from regular sessions after Eli and Rosie took on more responsibility. But then he missed a second Thursday. And a third. Rosie tried calling him. No answer. On the fourth week, Eli went to his apartment. The building was a modest walk-up off Hawthorne, with ivy crawling up the brick and a broken buzzer.
Eli knocked fort à long time.
No sound. He left a note taped to the door.
We miss your voice. Come back when you can. Eli.
2 days later, Mr. Whitaker showed up at the writing room. He looked thinner.
Pâle.
His eyes were a little sunken, his skin loose around his jaw. But his smile was still there, quiet and knowing. You look tired, Eli said carefully.
Monsieur Whitaker gave a small look.
That's the polite way of saying I look like hell. Eli didn't answer. He waited. I've been at the hospital, Mr. Whitaker said after a pause. Pancreatic cancer. Stage 4.
The word landed like brick. Eli sat down slowly.
What does that mean? It means there's not much time, he said simply. A few months, maybe. Depends on how stubborn my body is. Eli couldn't find his voice. I'm not doing treatment, Mr. Whitaker added. I've thought about it. But I've already buried a daughter. I've watched what chemo does to a person. I'd rather spend my days writing, not waiting in fluorescent rooms. You're not even trying? Eli asked, sharper than he meant. Mr. Whitaker's face softened. I've spent my whole life helping people tell the truth. I think I owe myself the same honesty.
Silence.
Then let me write with you, Eli said. If time's short, let's fill it. Mr. Whitaker smiled. I was hoping you'd say that. They met every Tuesday and Friday, in the quiet corners of the public library or at Mr. Whitaker's apartment. They wrote side by side. Not essays or stories, but fragments, memories, lines from lives half told. Mr. Whitaker wrote about his daughter, Maya. Her laughter.
The way she danced barefoot in the kitchen.
The accident.
The silence afterward.
Eli wrote about Zion. About Rosie.
About Portland and the streets and the boy he used to be.
They didn't call it a book. It wasn't formal. It was just a document of two lives intersecting at the edge of something permanent. Sometimes, Mr. Whitaker would fall asleep mid-sentence, the pen slipping from his hand. Eli would quietly collect the pages, straighten them, and write something of his own beside them. One afternoon, as rain tapped against the windows, Mr. Whitaker looked up from his notebook and said, "Promise me something." Eli nodded. "When I go, don't write about the end. Don't write about the hospital or the bed or the way my body fails. Write about the room. Write about the stories. About what we built." "I don't want to write it all if you're not here," Eli said. Mr. Whitaker looked at him for a long time. "Then I haven't taught you anything." That night, Eli sat alone in his apartment and wrote. The worst thing grief does is make you forget the sound of someone's laugh before it lets you remember their pain. I want to remember him alive. Not dying.
Not drifting.
Just turning the page.
Monsieur Whitaker grew weaker.
He stopped coming to the writing room altogether. One Thursday, Eli brought the group to him. Rosie, Zion, Janelle, a few others. They piled into his living room with tea and notebooks and nervous laughter. Zion read a piece he'd written about letting go. Mr. Whitaker smiled through the fatigue. "That's the next writer," he whispered. 3 weeks later, he passed. Quietly. In his sleep. No drama. No fear. Just a body finally giving up its fight. At the funeral, Eli read a piece. It wasn't about death. It was about thunder. He told me once that his daughter thought thunderstorms were dragons fighting in the sky. I think he was the thunder, loud without shouting. Now he's gone. But every time it rains, I'll listen for the dragons. The writing room changed after that. Slower. Quieter. But not empty. Zion led a workshop one night entirely on voice. Rosie started organizing a yearly retreat for teen writers. Janelle published her first poem in a national journal. And Eli, in the wake of grief, kept writing. Not to escape it, but to hold it. To understand it. Then, one cold December evening, Rosie called him. "Something's arrived," she said. "You should come by." At the center, she handed him a small package.
No return address.
Inside was a thin manuscript, bound with twine.
A note on the cover read. Letters from the quai.
Compiled by Whitaker and Bennett. For every voice that thought it didn't matter. It was all there. Their fragments. Their memories. Their pieces.
Side by side.
Eli sat down on the floor and read every page. When he reached the last one, he found a line scrawled in Mr. Whitaker's handwriting. "Some people teach you how to write. Others teach you why." Eli closed the manuscript and cried for the first time since the funeral. Not because of the loss, but because of everything he still had. Winter settled over Portland like a heavy coat, thick with fog and silence. In the early mornings, frost lined the sidewalks, turning every footstep into a faint crunch. The city felt slower, as if holding its breath. Eli stood at the front of the small community auditorium, the manuscript held tightly in his hands. Letters from the Quiet had finally been printed. Not by a publisher, not yet, but bound carefully by Rosie's friend, using recycled paper and hand-stitched covers.
Tirty copy.
Just enough for the room that evening.
The gathering wasn't large. Just familiar. The writing room crew.
A few new faces. Zion sat in the second row, bouncing his knee in quiet anticipation. Rosie stood by the side table, arranging tea bags and paper cups, her clipboard tucked under her arm like always. Eli cleared his throat. "This isn't a launch," he said. "Not really. It's not a reading either. It's something between a goodbye and a continuation. These pages," he held the book up, "they're pieces of us. Mine.
Monsieur Whittaker's.
Yours." He flipped to the opening page. It starts with a story.
Note à grand one. Just a boy in a school who wanted to disappear.
But someone saw him.
Note true à spotlight. Juste true silence.
He paused. Mr. Whittaker taught me that sometimes, the most powerful things we write are the ones we never planned. The stories we're scared to say out loud. The ones that come out in fragments and ink and long pauses. That's what this book is.
Fragment.
But together, they form something whole. He read the first piece, one of Mr. Whittaker's shorter entries, a quiet reflection on growing up in New Orleans, writing poems in the back of his mother's church programs. When he finished, the room stayed quiet. Then Zion stood up. "I want to read something," he said. He opened his own dog-eared notebook and began. "You said I'd find my voice. You said it would come slow and weird and broken, but it would come. You didn't tell me it would feel like breathing for the first time. Or that once I found it, I'd want to hand it to someone else. You didn't say goodbye. But this is my way of answering back." He closed the notebook. "Didn't cry.
Just sat down. Janelle read next."
Then a girl named Ivy. Then a boy named Daniel, who had only been coming for 2 weeks but already filled half a notebook with pieces about his brother. Each voice, raw and uncertain and real. Eli listened to them all. Afterward, people gathered in small groups. Some wrote notes in the back of their copies. Others hugged, exchanged emails, left quietly. Rosie came up beside him. "You did it," she said. "We did it," Eli corrected. She smiled.
"What is next?"
"I want to take this further," he said. "Not just here.
Other cities.
Schools. Shelters.
Place like Silver Creek."
She raised an eyebrow.
"You're thinking big."
He nodded. "We've seen what happens when someone gets handed a notebook instead of a punishment." Rosie tapped her clipboard.
"Let's make it real."
In the months that followed, they built something larger than either of them had imagined. With help from community partners, they formed the Quiet Collective, a mobile writing program that brought workshops to spaces where no one had ever thought to ask kids what they had to say. Detention centers. Group homes. Transitional housing programs. Everywhere they went, they brought 3 things: paper, pens, and permission.
Permission to be messy.
To not finish. To write about what hurt. To name what was once unspeakable. Eli traveled across Oregon, then into Washington and Northern California. He slept on couches, in shelters, in motels. He read hundreds of pieces. Some 1 sentence long. Some too raw to read aloud. He kept a journal of every stop.
A line from A Boy in Spokane.
"I used to count how many days I'd go without being noticed. Now I count how many poems I've written."
From A Girl in Fresno.
"I don't remember the sound of my mother's voice, but I remember the words I wanted to say to her." From a trans teen in Tacoma. "They said I was confused. But I've never been clearer than when I'm writing in this room." Eli compiled them all. He titled the next book Pages from the Margins. It was published independently, funded by donations and a grant. Within months, schools started reaching out, asking for copies. Asking for Eli. He returned to Silver Creek High as a guest speaker. Room 214 was still there. The desks had been replaced.
The story wall, long gone.
But when he stepped into the classroom, he saw himself. Not in the mirror, but in the quiet kid in the back row, hood up, eyes lowered. He looked at that kid and smiled. Then he said, "Once I was here.
Right where you are.
And I thought being invisible was the safest way to survive. I didn't know that telling the truth could make you stronger." He handed out blank notebooks that day. Told them they didn't have to use them. Just keep them. In case the words ever came. As the students filed out, one left a page on the desk.
No name.
just a single sentence. I think maybe I'm not as alone as I thought. Eli folded the paper and put it in his coat pocket. Back in Portland, he walked along the river one cold morning and reread Mr. Whitaker's final letter, tucked in the back of Letters from the Quiet.
You m'aides me believen.
In words. In youth.
In second chance. Tell the story, Eli. Not just your.
Theirs. He looked out at the water, took a breath, then opened his notebook. The first page was blank. He began.
Some stories don't end.
They echo.